Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. Thought I'd talk a little bit about lumber today. I've been reading a lot of stories about how there is a shortage of pressure-treated lumber across the nation. In fact, lumber in general, but especially noticeable in pressure-treated lumber. Now, for those of you who don't know, I work at a lumber yard. I've worked lumber yards my entire life. I really have my fingers on the pulse of the industry. So, a few months ago, when the lockdown took place and all these states locked down and told everybody to stay home, don't go to work, unless you have an essential job, stuff like that, lumber mills started curtailing development. They don't want to be sitting on a bunch of inventory, and if housing was going to slow down and the demand for lumber was going to drop, they don't want to be sitting on a bunch of inventory, so they started curtailing development. But when the lockdown took place, something that I don't think people were expecting to happen. The run on pressure treated. People started buying a lot of pressure treated lumber, and I mean a lot of it. And we noticed it here at our store as well. And this demand for pressure treated lumber pretty much wiped out the suppliers, to the point that we had trouble getting in a lot of the more common items. People are stuck at home. They want to rebuild their decks, or maybe build a deck, put up a fence to block their neighbors because they're going to be spending more time out there in the yard or something. The demand for pressure-treated lumber anyway, really skyrocketed. And now we're sitting in a situation where it's very difficult to source out a lot of this pressure-treated lumber. Now, I just ordered in some stock for the store. I was able to get pretty much everything I had ordered except for 4x4s. And 4x4 pressure treated of all lengths were gone. There was none to be had. And he said he won't be able to supply me with any for at least 10 days. 4x4, 8 foot, 10 foot, 12 foot, 16 foot, gone. None to be had. And this is a critical piece of lumber when it comes to building, because the 4x4 is the start of everything. If you're going to build a fence, you need the 4x4 first. If you're going to build a deck, you're usually using 4x4 for your post. It's the first thing that you need. And if you do not have those 4x4s, the rest of the project is going to go on hold. So I asked him about it. I said, what's going on? Is it demand? Is it supply? Why are you unable to provide me with these 4x4s? And he answered yes. Its demand is up, and the mills are not able to supply them with the 4x4s that they need in order to treat. They're getting it, but they're not getting it at a pace that's fast enough to keep up with the demand. So I got to thinking about this for a little bit, and I went to my buyer, who buys the majority of the stuff for the yard, buys a lot of the standard and better framing lumber and stuff like that. And I asked him, I said, are you having trouble sourcing out lumber right now? And he said, well, put it this way. I ordered a truck last week, and I won't get it for another 2 weeks. 3 weeks out. Typically, when you order a truck of lumber, you could get it within a couple of days. Maybe a week. He was 3 weeks out on his order. He said plywood is even worse. He ordered that a week ago. He said he won't get it until somewhere around the 20th. Almost 5 weeks out. 4 or 5 weeks out for a truckload of plywood. And I said, holy moly, that is the longest I have ever heard of being out as far as plywood. From the time you order it till the time you can get it. 4 weeks, 5 weeks is by far the farthest I've ever heard. And he says, yeah, and get this. The retail price of that half-inch CDX is probably going to jump up about $4 or $5 a sheet. Now, to put that into some kind of comparison, back when the lumber future prices were at $650 per thousand, we were selling half-inch CDX for around $26.50 a sheet. In fact, I have a video talking about the day that I saw plywood, the half-inch CDX, hit $26.50 a sheet. And about 3 or 4 months after that video, we noticed that the price was starting to drop. The lumber future prices dropped. Mills up in Canada were curtailing development. there was trade wars taking place, there was a lot of things that were taking place inside of the lumber and timber industry, and the lumber futures dropped out big time. When they dropped, the price of lumber went with it, the retail pricing. Same with the plywood. So back in 2017, when they peaked out, we were selling plywood and 2x4s. Well, the plywood was selling for $26.50 a sheet. 2x4s were selling for around $4.29 a piece for a 2x4 8. When the lumber futures dropped out, it dropped the price of that half-inch CDX down to around $16 a sheet. Almost $10 less per piece, per sheet. 2x4s went from $4.29 down to $2.50. So today we're sitting, I haven't checked it before I started the video, but we were somewhere around $4.50 per thousand on the futures market for lumber. CDX, the half-inch CDX, is going to go back up to $26.50, and 2x4s right now are selling at $3.95. The next truck that comes in, I would imagine they're going to be closer to that $4.30 mark again, that $4.29. So there is an obvious demand that's taking place right now. There is a supply crunch that took place from the lockdown. And I can only assume that these mills would want to be firing up and pumping out as much lumber as they can in order to meet the demand. So get this, guys. I'm from an area, I live in Oregon. Oregon is one of the top lumbering, in fact, I think it's the top lumber producer in the nation. So more lumber comes out of Oregon, or at least the Pacific Northwest area, than just about any other part of the country. And logging is like a big part of our community. There's two things that we do in this county. We fish and we log. That's our two main money makers. Well, of course now it's a lot of tourism, but of course with the lockdown there wasn't nearly as much as that. But those are the three ways that this county makes money. Is tourism, fishing, and logging, and especially logging. So I went to a buddy of mine who I graduated high school with. I've known him for 30 years. And I said, how's the logging business going right now? And he says, dude, it's not good. And I said, well, what's up? What's going on? I mean, are you guys busy? You slow? Are you working, far away? What's happening? And he says, we don't have any job to go to. We're not cutting right now. And I said, well, what's happened? I said, is it the mill demand is down? Is it the exports that down? What happened? He says, well, yeah, a lot of it had to do with the exports. China was buying a lot of raw logs from the United States. In turn, we were buying a lot of lumber from Canada. But then we had these trade wars kicking in, and everybody was causing, we got these tariffs on everybody, and the supply of lumber coming out of Canada diminished dramatically. China quit buying a lot of logs from the United States. So I thought, okay, well, that's not a big deal, right? We were buying a lot of lumber out of Canada. We're stopped buying a lot of it because of the tariffs, the 30% tariff on Canada. And we were shipping a lot of logs over to China. So let's just start milling those logs for ourselves, and there's our lumber supply. But that's not what's taken place. So even though there is a huge demand for lumber right now, the mills are still not demanding a lot of logs coming from these loggers, coming from the property owners. During a time when you would expect the mills to be buying as much as they could, getting as many logs as they can, pumping out as much lumber as they can, considering that there is a lumber shortage taking place here in the United States. So I got to thinking about this, because a few weeks ago I was reading an article coming out of the Oregon Public Broadcasting.org, and I'll leave a link down in the description for you guys. And it was talking about how Wall Street has taken over the lumber industry, the timber industry, with their hedge funds and their investment trusts. And I was looking at it on how they're able to manipulate the system, and it was really devastating to a lot of these smaller communities, because a lot of people don't realize how much logging dollars is used to support the communities around here. And what it ended up happening is that these Wall Street investors, these hedge funds and investment trusts, were able to buy up a lot of the private land, a lot of the private timberland here in Oregon. In fact, I think Oregon is the number one state with more ownership of Wall Street in their private timberland than any other state. So Wall Street owns more of our private timberland than in any other state. Then they lobbied to cut the taxes, and they started cutting a lot of logs. So they log more, but they're paying less taxes to the communities, and these communities are devastated by it. And in that article, they talk about how they've had to shut down libraries, fire police force. There's just a lot of, for the schools, there was a lot of timber dollars that was used to support these communities that have been taken away because of these lobbyists and passing laws to cut the taxes that they pay. So I got to thinking, well, if they did that, are they pushing a situation, and this is my speculation in it, are they pushing a situation here in the United States, or especially coming out of places like Oregon here, who produce a lot of lumber? Are they creating a demand to increase the future prices so that they can make more off of their lumber, instead of allowing like a market price discovery? Instead, they create a shortage, causing a demand to increase the pricing. Because right now we have lumber at $450 per thousand in the futures market, but the retail price of it is about ready to increase about ready to reach in on its all-time high. You see what's happening here? Something very strange has taken place in the lumber futures market. Something very strange has taken place in the supply chain. And it's very noticeable right now in that pressure-treated lumber. Like I said, you can find articles from all over the country talking about how there's a pressure-treated lumber shortage right now. So it's not just Oregon, it's not just my community, it's across the entire nation. And I just think back to that OPB article, and it just makes me believe, it just leads me to believe that Wall Street is somehow manipulating the system. If you can get enough of these hedge funds together to make a plan, and I know it's conspiratorial thought, but if you follow the silver market enough, you can see where there is a paper manipulation game totally taking place in the silver market, and there's no denying that. I mean, there's absolutely no denying it. There's no reason why it can't take place in the lumber market as well. And nobody pays attention to the lumber market. Nobody does. It is almost impossible to find articles talking about lumber futures, lumber prices, lumber anything. But yet, it's the key component to housing industry. And if you have a demand for houses where there is going to be a lot of homes being built, I would only assume that the people who own the logs right now, who own the timber, who own the lumber, are going to want to get top dollar for it. And if it's these Wall Street hedge funds and investment trusts who are in charge of the supply chain, they can manipulate it in such a way that causes the prices to skyrocket. So I can only assume over the next couple of weeks and months that we are going to see lumber and plywood, all the framing material, things that you would use to frame a house together. You're gonna see those prices really, really hit the moon. At least that's my opinion on it, from the things that I've seen here over the last few weeks. Anyway, thought I'd give you guys that update. Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.